I still remember the way their laughter echoed across the church hall. Sharp, brittle, like glass breaking against marble floors. "Look at Miss Margarita," one of them whispered, "still wearing that old red dress again. Doesn't she know it's out of style?" I didn't flinch. I had learned long ago that silence was the most elegant armor a woman could wear. The red dress they mocked wasn't just fabric, it was a story stitched from sacrifice. My son, Elijah, had made it for me 5 years earlier when he was still struggling to get his small fashion studio off the ground. He couldn't afford silk back then. He'd used leftover fabric scraps from a donation bin. But he'd sewn it with love, with pride, with the same hands that had once wiped away his tears after being bullied for dreaming too big. They didn't know any of that. To them, I was just an old woman past her prime, 60, widowed, living quietly in a small house on the edge of Atlanta. I suppose they thought my best days had already been buried with my husband. But that Sunday morning, as the choir sang Amazing Grace, I whispered to myself, "They'll know soon enough." Because tomorrow, the world would see Elijah's name shining in lights for the first time. The next morning, the sun crept through my blinds like a promise I had waited a lifetime to hear. I sat by the window, sipping my coffee from the chipped mug Elijah painted for me in 3rd grade, the one that still had his little fingerprint on the handle. It was funny how some things never lost their worth, even when the world around you changed. That day was Elijah's big day, his launch, his moment, the first official runway show under his own label, Elijah Carter Designs. He'd been working toward it for years, quietly and tirelessly, like a man possessed by purpose. When he first told me he wanted to be a designer, people laughed. They said, "A black boy from the South, designing clothes? Be realistic, Elijah." But I saw something in his eyes, the same quiet fire that once lived in mine when I was his age. I told him, "If they don't believe in your dream, baby, believe enough for both of you." Now that dream was ready to take flight. I pulled that same red dress from my closet, the one they'd laughed at in church. I smoothed the wrinkles with my palms and looked in the mirror. The years had traced lines across my face, but the woman staring back at me still had a spark, not of youth, but of survival. I wrapped a soft black shawl around my shoulders, pinned my silver hair neatly, and whispered, "Let them see." The event was held at a downtown Atlanta gallery. White walls, polished floors, and photographers who looked like they'd never seen a woman my age before. They brushed past me politely, eyes scanning for someone more relevant. But I didn't mind. I was there for one reason, to see my son shine. When the lights dimmed and the first model walked out, my breath caught in my chest. Elijah's collection was breathtaking, a blend of African textures and modern elegance, bold colors stitched with meaning. The crowd murmured, impressed. I saw faces soften, pens move, cameras flash. But it wasn't until the final look, the last model on the runway, that I felt my heart stop. She was wearing the red dress. My red dress. Only now it wasn't made from scraps. It was made from silk, flowing, powerful, reimagined. Elijah had remade it as a tribute to me. The spotlight bathed the stage in gold as the model turned, the dress catching every glimmer like fire. The audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the room. And then Elijah appeared, tall, proud, tears glistening in his eyes. He bowed, then looked straight at me. "Mama," he mouthed, "that one's yours." After the show, people swarmed him. Investors, stylists, journalists, everyone wanting a piece of his genius. I stayed in the corner, my heart full. But he pushed through the crowd until he reached me. "You kept me believing, Mama," he said, pulling me into his arms. "This is all yours, too." I smiled, tears threatening to fall. And that's when I saw them. The same women from church standing near the back. Their mouths were open, their faces pale. They looked from Elijah to me, realization dawning. The woman they had mocked for wearing an old dress was the mother of the man everyone was now calling the future of American fashion. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. I held my head high and walked past them, every step a silent victory. I still remember the night that red dress was born. It wasn't stitched in a studio or cut from fancy fabric. It came to life in a dim kitchen, under the soft hum of a flickering light and the sound of Elijah breathing softly in his sleep. Back then, we didn't have much. I was working 2 jobs, one cleaning offices downtown, another washing dishes at a small diner that smelled of burnt coffee and cheap cologne. My hands were always cracked, my back always sore, but I refused to let Elijah see how tired I truly was. He deserved to see hope, even when I didn't feel it myself. That night, the church was hosting its annual charity gala. Everyone was expected to attend, even the help, as they called us. I didn't have anything decent to wear, so I went through my old fabric box, a collection of worn curtains, leftover scraps, and one piece of faded red cloth from a neighbor's donation pile. It wasn't much, but I made it work. I cut, sewed, and pieced it together until dawn, humming old gospel songs under my breath. When I tried it on, I remember looking in the mirror and whispering, "You still got it, girl." That dress carried me through more than one storm. It wasn't just cloth, it was courage, sewn together with every prayer I'd whispered when no one was listening. Years later, Elijah would ask me, "Mama, why do you always wear that same red dress?" And I'd smile and say, "Because, baby, it reminds me I can make beauty out of broken things." He never forgot that. The years that followed weren't easy. When Elijah turned 16, his father, who'd been gone most of our lives, came back with empty promises and smooth lies. He told Elijah he could make him a star if he stopped wasting time sketching dresses. Elijah looked at me that night, torn between the man who left and the woman who stayed. I didn't tell him what to do. I just said, "Follow the voice that makes you build, not the one that makes you beg." He stayed. But from that night, Elijah worked even harder. He'd sit for hours drawing designs on the floor while I folded laundry beside him. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at my red dress again, tracing it with his eyes, studying every seam. I didn't know it then, but that memory, the sight of his mama making something out of nothing, became the blueprint for his entire life. Years passed. He went off to design school on a scholarship I didn't even know he'd applied for. I sold my car to help him buy fabric for his first project. He called every week, telling me about classes, professors, how they couldn't believe he'd learned to sew by hand with an old needle and kitchen scissors. Then came the silence. 3 months without a word. I thought something had happened. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe the city swallowed him whole. I'd wake up at night, my heart racing, imagining him alone in some cold apartment. And then, one day, a box arrived. Inside, a red dress. Not the one I'd made, a new one. Smooth, elegant, carefully folded. And a note that said, "You taught me how to sew with faith. Now it's my turn to show you what that faith became. Elijah." When I wore that new red dress to church the following Sunday, I didn't expect anything. But I saw the looks, the whispers. They said it looked cheap, too bright, not age-appropriate. And yet, none of them knew it was designed by my son, the same boy they once said would never make it out of the projects. I smiled through it all, because deep down, I knew one day the world would know his name. That day came years later, when that same red dress appeared on the runway under bright lights, worn by a model who looked like the daughter I never had. And when Elijah mouthed, "That one's yours, Mama," I felt the past, the pain, and the prayers all melt into pride. That dress had come full circle, from a kitchen table to a global stage. When the headlines came out, Elijah Morgan's New York fashion line debuts at Paris Week, I sat in my kitchen with the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years. The tea had gone cold. My hands trembled, but not because of age. It was something deeper, pride mixed with guilt, like sugar that wouldn't quite dissolve. I should have been there. I should have been sitting in the front row, clapping for my son. But instead, I was home, the woman everyone once mocked for wearing thrift store dresses. The phone buzzed. "Mom," Elijah's voice came through, steady and warm. "They're asking about you here. They want to know where I got my first design idea." I swallowed hard. "And what did you tell them?" He laughed softly. "That it came from watching you sew patches on my jeans when we couldn't afford new ones. You made broken things look beautiful." Tears blurred the world in front of me. I pressed the phone to my heart, not caring if it left a bruise. That night, I pulled out the old trunk from the attic, the one filled with scraps of fabric, sketches, and a photo of Elijah as a boy, modeling the little suit I made from curtains. The same curtains I used to hide behind when the landlord came knocking. I remembered those days too well. The humiliation, the pitying looks, the neighbors whispering about that poor woman with the crazy dreams. But I also remembered Elijah's smile when I'd spin him around and say, "Baby, one day people will wear our name." Now they did. The next morning, I went to the store wearing one of Elijah's new designs, a simple, elegant coat in deep olive green. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it carried something powerful, dignity. The same women who used to laugh at me in church stared as I passed. One of them, Denise, approached. "Margarita, honey, where did you get that coat? It's stunning." I looked her straight in the eye. "From my son." She blinked, confused. "Your son?" "Elijah Morgan." Her mouth opened, but no words came. I smiled. Not the smug smile of revenge, but the calm smile of a woman who'd finally stopped needing to explain herself. That evening, Elijah called again. "Mom, Paris wants me to design a legacy collection, something that tells my story. But I told them it's our story." I closed my eyes. For the first time in decades, the silence of my house didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Every stitch, every tear, every night I spent praying instead of sleeping had led here. I whispered to myself, "You see, Margarita, you weren't just surviving. You were building." The mirror across the room caught my reflection. The same woman, the same wrinkles, the same tired eyes, but behind them, a spark that hadn't dimmed, only waited. And for the first time, I smiled at the woman in the glass, not for what she'd lost, but for everything she'd created. The invitation arrived in a white envelope with gold lettering. Maison Morgan, Paris Fashion Week. Guest of honor, Margarita Morgan. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my fingers trembling. Paris, the city I used to dream about while ironing other people's clothes. I used to whisper to Elijah when he was little, "One day we'll walk those streets, not as servants, but as stories worth telling." And now, that day had come. I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, the same cracked mirror I'd owned since my 20s. My reflection stared back. Gray hair swept into a neat bun, soft lines around my mouth, eyes that had seen too much pain but refused to give up their fire. I didn't see the cleaner anymore. I saw the mother of a designer. I saw Margarita Morgan. The flight to Paris felt unreal. Every cloud outside the window looked like a piece of my past. The nights I'd cried into my pillow, the mornings I'd gone to work in silence, pretending I didn't hear the laughter behind me. But each mile that passed felt like a piece of healing, too, carried away with the wind. When I landed, Elijah was waiting at the gate. He looked taller, stronger, but his eyes still held the same warmth they did when he was a boy. "Mom," he said, pulling me into his arms, "you made it." I smiled. "You didn't think I'd miss my baby's big night, did you?" That evening, the lights of Paris shimmered like melted gold. The venue was breathtaking. Marble floors, chandeliers that looked like frozen rain, and music that hummed with confidence. I sat in the front row next to editors and celebrities whose names I'd only seen in magazines. Then the show began. Each model that walked down the runway wore a piece that told a chapter of our life. Rough denim stitched with gold thread, coats made from recycled fabrics that looked regal, not ragged. But when the final model appeared, the crowd gasped. She wore a dress made entirely from patchwork, old fabrics, torn silks, and faded cottons sewn together with care. It was the same pattern I used to make when we had nothing but scraps. And there, on the hem, embroidered in gold, were the words, "To my mother, who taught me that broken things can still shine." The lights dimmed, the crowd rose to their feet, cameras flashed, and I couldn't stop the tears. Elijah came onto the stage, took my hand, and whispered, "This is your show too, Mom." I shook my head. "No, baby, this is yours." He smiled. "I only built it because you showed me how." That night, after the applause faded and the guests had left, we stood alone in the empty venue. I walked to the runway and ran my hand over the wooden floor. "I used to mop floors like this," I said softly, "and now I'm walking on one that has my name stitched into it." Elijah laughed. "Guess life has a way of turning the broom into a crown." We both laughed then, real, deep laughter that felt freedom. When I returned home to America, the world felt different. People who used to ignore me now stopped to talk, but I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my story. And every time I opened my closet and saw that patchwork dress Elijah gave me, I remembered one thing. You can't measure a woman's worth by the dirt on her hands, only by what she built with them. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when the past came walking back into my life. I had just finished a radio interview about Elijah's success and my own journey when my assistant rushed into the cafe, holding a soaked umbrella and an uncertain smile. "Mrs. Morgan," she said quietly, "there's a gentleman here asking for you. He says he's an old friend." I turned toward the window, and there he was, Richard. Even after all these years, I recognized him instantly. The sharp jawline softened by time, the once black hair now streaked with gray. He was wearing the same kind of expensive coat he always did, except now it hung loose, as if even his pride had shrunk. I hadn't seen him in more than 30 years. The man who had left me when I was cleaning houses, who said, "You're wasting your life, Margarita. You'll never be more than the help." Now he was standing in the rain, waiting for me. I straightened my blazer, took a slow sip of coffee, and whispered to myself, "You've survived worse storms than this." When I stepped outside, the wind carried the smell of wet asphalt and something old, maybe regret. "Margarita," he said, his voice trembling, "you look incredible." I smiled politely. "You look like you've seen better days." He chuckled, awkwardly. "Still sharp, I see." "I had to be," I replied. "Life doesn't hand women like me soft landings." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the cafe behind me. "I've read about you. Your son, the designer, the interviews, the farm. You really did it." "I told you I would," I said simply. "You just didn't stay long enough to see it." He sighed. "I made mistakes." Everyone does, but some mistakes cost more than others. There was silence for a moment, just the rain tapping between us like a metronome of memory. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I lost everything, Margarita. My business, my marriage. I live alone now. I saw your name on the radio, and I thought, maybe, maybe what? I cut him off gently. Maybe I'd still be waiting? That I'd need you to feel whole again? His face fell, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I just felt peace. I didn't come here to hurt you, he said softly. I came to say I'm proud of you. I see now what I never could before. I nodded slowly. Then say it, mean it, and go live whatever's left of your life, Richard. He looked down, then smiled faintly. You were always stronger than I knew. I turned to leave, then paused. No, Richard. I just stopped letting people like you decide how strong I was allowed to be. When I walked away, I didn't look back. The rain fell harder, washing away old ghosts. Inside the cafe, my assistant looked at me with wide eyes. Who was that? Just a chapter, I said with a smile. One that's finally closed. That night, I sat by my window, the city lights glimmering below like 1,000 tiny second chances. I thought of how far I'd come, from cleaning floors to owning them, from being left behind to leading my own story. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I'd become. Love found me when I wasn't looking for it, not in grand gestures or fireworks, but in quiet mornings, shared laughter, and the kind of peace that felt like coming home. It started at the Community Art Center. Elijah had convinced me to attend an exhibit that featured designs inspired by my early life, the mops, the rags, the cleaning gloves. You turned survival into art, Mama, he said. That night, as I stood before a sculpture shaped like a woman rising from a bucket of water, I heard a deep voice beside me say, "She doesn't look broken. She looks like she's made of storms and sunlight." I turned and met Henry. He wasn't young, not by any means. His beard was peppered with silver, and his hands were the kind that looked like they'd worked through life, not floated above it. He was a retired carpenter who now built wooden frames for local artists. Storms and sunlight, I smiled. That's poetic for a man with calloused hands. He chuckled. You'd be surprised what a pair of calloused hands can create. That was the start. Simple, unplanned, and slow. We began to meet every Thursday after my volunteer classes. Sometimes we'd walk through the park, sometimes we'd sit by the river in silence. He never asked about my past unless I offered it, and when I did, he listened like it was scripture. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, he asked, "Do you ever regret any of it, Margarita? The struggle, the loneliness?" I thought for a moment. Regret? No. Pain teaches you how to be grateful for peace. I just wish I'd learned earlier that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. He nodded slowly. My late wife used to say that love should feel like rest after a long day, not another kind of work. I smiled. Then maybe we both worked enough to deserve some rest. That night, he walked me home, carrying an umbrella though the sky was clear. When we reached my gate, I said, "Henry, it's not raining." He winked. Just in case, life has a way of surprising us. And it did. Weeks turned into months, and his presence became a quiet rhythm in my days. He'd fix the squeaky hinges on my porch, leave wildflowers in a mason jar by my door, and bring me warm bread on cold mornings. No declarations, no demands, just small kindnesses that spoke louder than any promise. One afternoon, as I cooked gumbo in my kitchen, he leaned against the doorway and said, "You know, I read about your story. The cleaner who became the boss? That's one hell of a tale." I laughed. It's just life, Henry. It breaks you, then builds you back stronger, like your furniture. He stepped closer, eyes soft. Then I guess I'm lucky to meet you after the rebuilding. For a long time, I thought love had passed me by. But what I learned with Henry was that sometimes love isn't about starting over. It's about arriving whole. He never tried to fix me because he saw I wasn't broken. He just stood beside me, steady and sure, reminding me that even the strongest souls deserve gentleness. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the rain, he reached for my hand and said quietly, "I don't know how much time either of us has left, but whatever we do, I want to spend it making sure you never doubt you're loved." And for the first time in decades, I felt safe enough to whisper back, "I think I already know that." Fame is a strange thing. It can lift you up and quietly pull your family apart. When Elijah's fashion line took off, it happened faster than any of us could grasp. His designs, the same ones they used to mock me for, were suddenly walking down New York runways. The world whispered his name like a prayer. Elijah Carter, the visionary from the South. But at home, I still saw my boy, the one who once tore holes in his school pants and begged me to stitch them up with gold thread because, in his words, "Mama, even rips can shine." I should have been proud, and I was. But pride can be heavy, especially when it's laced with fear. The calls began first, reporters wanting the story of the cleaner mother behind the designer son. They wanted my pain packaged neatly, something pretty enough to print on glossy pages. They wanted tears, struggle, redemption, a headline that would sell. I refused, because my story wasn't for sale. "Elijah," I told him one morning, "they don't care about the truth. They care about what makes people click." He sighed, running his hand over his hair, frustration tightening his jaw. "Mama, I need to build the brand. People love a story. You're part of mine." I looked at him, my heart both proud and aching. "I am your story, baby, but I'm also a person, not a brand." He didn't answer. He just stared at his coffee like it held the words he couldn't say. Weeks passed, and the distance grew like a crack in glass. We still talked, but everything felt rehearsed, safe. He started missing Sunday dinners, then birthdays. The world had swallowed him whole. One night, I saw him on television, standing next to celebrities, his name glowing behind him in bright white lights. The interviewer asked, "Where did your creative vision come from?" He paused. My heart held its breath. And then he said, "From struggle. From watching my mother work through every night, cleaning offices while I dreamed." It was the truth, but not all of it. He didn't say that I'd taught him to draw strength from love, not pain. That I'd taught him that humility could build empires. When the interview ended, I sat there in my quiet living room, staring at the screen. Henry reached over, turning down the volume, his eyes searching mine. "You okay, Margarita?" I nodded slowly. "He's shining, Henry, but sometimes I wonder if he remembers where the light came from." Later that week, Elijah showed up at my door. No cameras, no entourage, just my boy in a hoodie, looking tired. "Mama," he said softly, "you mad at me?" I didn't answer. I just turned off the stove and sat across from him. He took a deep breath. I got lost. I kept hearing people tell me I was the brand, I was the face, and I forgot I was your son first. I looked at him, tears burning behind my eyes. "You don't owe me anything, baby. I just need you to know your name means something because of who you are, not who they say you are." He reached for my hand. "Then promise me something. Don't let them make my name bigger than yours." I smiled, finally letting the tears fall. "Elijah, the name on your tag might shine brighter, but the name that raised it will always have roots." That night, we sat together like we used to, me sewing a tear in his sleeve while he hummed an old gospel tune. Fame had taken him far, but in that small kitchen, he was home again. There's something sacred about silence, the kind that fills a home when everyone you love is grown and gone, yet their laughter still echoes in the walls. My days had slowed, but my spirit never did. I found myself spending more time in that small sewing room, the one I once called my office, the same room where I patched Elijah's first designs, where I prayed over unpaid bills, and where dreams were stitched out of faith and fabric. Now, that room had become a classroom. Every Saturday, young girls from the neighborhood came by. Some were shy, some loud, all of them carrying a spark, the same one I'd once seen in Elijah's eyes. They called me Miss Margarita, though I told them, "Baby, just call me Mama Rita. Everyone does eventually." I taught them to sew, yes, but more than that, I taught them what life had taught me, that you could be overlooked, underestimated, even mocked, but if you keep working with love, life finds a way to shine through your hands. Every stitch tells a story, I'd say, watching their fingers tremble as they guided the needle. So don't rush your story, baby. Let it unfold. Some Saturdays, Elisha would come by, sometimes with a camera crew, sometimes just himself. He'd watch quietly as I guided those girls, his eyes soft, his shoulders no longer heavy with ego. He'd always bring fabric, rich colors, silks, denims, wools. "For your students, Mama," he'd say with a wink. Once, one of the girls asked him, "Mr. Carter, are you famous?" He laughed, "Not as famous as Mama Rita." And I swear my heart almost burst. But fame was never my goal. Purpose was. Henry had passed by then, quietly, in his sleep, one gentle hand still clutching my old apron. Losing him felt like losing the ground under my feet, but even grief couldn't take away what we had built together, a home filled with love, honesty, and hard-earned grace. I carried him with me in every quiet prayer, every morning coffee, every laugh shared with a child who reminded me why hope mattered. One afternoon, I sat in the community center, watching my students showcase their first collection. They'd titled it Threads of Home. The pieces were raw, imperfect, yet beautiful in ways that only truth could be. As the lights dimmed, Elijah walked out, took the microphone, and said, "Everything you see tonight, every thread, every fold, was born from a woman who believed broken things could be beautiful again." The crowd rose to their feet. I wanted to hide, but he came to me, hand outstretched, voice trembling. "Mama, this is your runway now." And for the first time in my life, I walked down a runway, not in designer clothes, but in the same old dress I'd worn to clean offices, the same one they'd once laughed at. But now, every eye saw it differently, because now they knew who made it. As I reached the end of the runway, I looked back and saw Elijah, tears glimmering under the lights. Behind him, my girls, my students, my future. And it hit me. This was never just about clothes, or even struggle. It was about legacy, the kind that doesn't fade with time or fame. When the applause softened, I whispered under my breath, "Henry, we did it." And for a brief, beautiful moment, I could almost feel his hand in mine. Morning sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, painting soft gold patterns on the walls. My hands, wrinkled and strong, rested on the same sewing table that had carried me through decades of tears, laughter, and prayer. It had been years since I'd worked for anyone, years since I'd needed to prove who I was. Now I lived in the rhythm of quiet, the hum of the city outside, the chirping of birds near my window, and the gentle whir of the old ceiling fan that had outlived most of my fears. People often say peace comes after success, but I learned it's the other way around. Peace comes when you stop needing success to feel whole. I had stopped chasing long ago. Elijah's brand had grown beyond anything I ever imagined. Fashion magazines, TV interviews, charity galas, all of it had his name. Yet every time he stepped on a stage, he carried a piece of me. He'd always say, "I'm just continuing the story my mama started with a needle and thread." Sometimes I'd find myself in the back row of his shows, unnoticed, smiling quietly as models walked down the runway wearing designs inspired by my old aprons and patchwork dresses. The audience saw style, I saw memories. Every stitch was a heartbeat from my past. I spent my days mentoring young women, daughters, mothers, even grandmothers, who came searching for something I knew well, self-worth. Some came broken, ashamed, tired of being invisible, and every single time I'd tell them, "Baby, the world might not see your shine right now, but keep going. God does his best work in the dark. At night, when the house was quiet and the moon sat low, I'd talk to Henry like he never left. "Can you believe it, baby?" I'd whisper. "Our boy made it. We made it." I imagined him smiling, that soft, proud smile of his, the one that always told me, "You were right to keep going." My favorite part of the day was still mornings, when the smell of coffee filled the kitchen and sunlight kissed the worn-out photos on my fridge. Pictures of Elijah as a boy, his first storefront, his first award. Pictures of me holding scissors, him holding dreams. That small kitchen had seen every season of our lives, from hunger to hope, from mocking laughter to standing ovations. And now, as I sat there, a warm cup in my hand, I realized something. Life doesn't hand you peace. You have to sew it together from the scraps it gives you. Each sorrow, each struggle, each small joy, they all become part of the pattern. One afternoon, Elijah came by with his daughter, my granddaughter, little Rosa, with her daddy's eyes and my stubborn spirit. She was only 8, but already sketching dresses on napkins. "Mama," Elijah said, "Rosa wants you to teach her to sew." I laughed. "You sure you want Grandma's old lessons, baby?" Rosa nodded eagerly, her curls bouncing. "Daddy says you taught him how to make magic from cloth." I smiled, blinking back tears. "Then let's make some magic, sugar." And just like that, the legacy continued, not through fame or fortune, but through hands guided by love. As evening fell, I stood by the window, watching Rosa thread her first needle. The sunset painted the sky in colors no designer could ever match: deep orange, soft pink, and the quiet gray of peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely still. No regrets, no fear, just gratitude. I touched the silver locket on my chest. Inside, a picture of Henry and Elijah, taken the day our shop finally opened. "I'm ready," I whispered to the silence, "whenever it's time." Because I knew when my story ended, it wouldn't fade. It would live on in every stitch, every dream, every woman who ever learned that even broken threads can make something beautiful. And somewhere, in the soft hum of the sewing machine, I swear I could still hear Henry's voice saying, "You did good, Margarita. You did real good."